The BYD Sealion 7 is a pretty accomplished, large electric SUV. The question now is, do you really need it to go from 0 to 100 in 4.5 seconds? Now, followers of the channel will know that we've already reviewed the BYD Sealion 7. The difference being that was the premium rear-wheel drive. This is the performance all-wheel drive. Now, differentiating them really isn't much. Firstly, your power outputs have been significantly improved by the addition of another electric motor powering the front wheels. As a result, this car is punchy enough to go again from 0 to 100 in 4.5 seconds, a fact that BYD will remind you via a badge on the boot. On top of that, this car also benefits from active frequency dampers, which is sort of like a passive adjustable damping control, which promises better body control in theory. Now, in terms of charging and range, it is broadly similar to what we saw from the premium, which means that in terms of DC charging, this car will accept up to 150 kilowatts DC, while AC charging is up to 11 kilowatts. Now, if you are DC charging this car, 10 to 80% takes about half an hour, whereas if you are AC charging the car from dead to full, will take probably about 8 hours, thanks to this car's 80 plus kilowatt hour battery. In terms of range, this all-wheel drive performance is also a little bit down compared to the premium, which again begs the question, do you really need to go from 0 to 100 in 4.5 seconds? At first glance, it can actually be a bit of a challenge to tell them apart, the premium and the performance, because from what you see, nothing really much has changed, which means that up front, you get a front-end design inspired by the BYD Seal, and so you get these large, thin headlights up here, replete with automatic high beam and a scrolling indicator down here. I am glad, however, that over the Seal, we no longer get additional LEDs down here to make it look like some sort of reconditioned Alphard. You also get no grille, naturally, but you do have underbreathers down there in order to feed cold air over the radiators, which help to maintain the thermal efficiency of the battery. Now, under this bonnet, you will also find a pretty good amount of space, certainly large enough for the emergency repair kit as well as your charging cables, which means that the front boot in this car is surprisingly practical, certainly larger than what we got on the BYD Seal. And that's broadly the same case as you move down the side, because again, the differences are very minor. So for this performance, the rolling stock has actually been upgraded. Whereas the premium ran on 19-inch alloy wheels with a different set of tires, the performance gets 20-inch alloy wheels of the same design, wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport EV tires. Now, between the spokes, you will also be able to notice the red brake calipers, again denoting this as the performance model over the rear-wheel drive premium. However, everything else down the side remains the same, which means you still get the SUV coupe-like roofline, where it sort of terminates in a nice sort of pert rear end, which I think makes this car look quite distinctive. And you also get the BYD design badge here, which I still detest. There are also flush door handles on this car with an access button on either of the front doors, which means that even if you walk up to the car on this side, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Although this car does come with a proximity key, which means that when you walk up to the car, it can present the door handles to you anyway. Now, one of the things about this car that I'm not a big fan of, however, are the wheel arch claddings, because for some reason they are squarer than the wheel arch themselves. Now, to me, this is clearly a way to try and make this car look a little bit more like a crossover, although to me, I would have preferred this to just have been round, because the overall surfacing on this car already looks quite good. I also appreciate this car having very strong haunches here at the rear, because from the rearview mirrors, all you see is this sharp shoulder line, which I think looks really, really good. Now, because of this car's SUV coupe-like proportions, you get this spoiler up here, which I think looks quite good, and that actually channels the air over the rear windscreen to a point where BYD says you don't need a rear windscreen wiper. Okay, you also get a secondary spoiler here, which then leads into the rest of the boot lid. Now, on this car, you get full-width LED taillights replete with scrolling indicators, as well as this sort of droplet light effect, which I think looks pretty good. This car also comes with a welcome and goodbye animation sequence every time you lock and unlock the car, which animates the rear lights, which I think looks pretty good. As we move further down, you get the flat BYD badge here. I'm so glad that no longer spells out the entire brand name, but that then reveals this car's issue. Like many of its siblings, BYD seems to like to stick as many badges as humanly possible on the tailgate. And so on that side, it says EV all-wheel drive, another way to demarcate this as the all-wheel drive model. And on this side, it says BYD Sealion 7 4.5S. This is not necessary because that's already there. This is fine. This is to let everyone know that you have the hot one. But Anyway, as we move further down, there is these set of rear diffusers to look something like Venturi tunnels, which I think do look quite smart. And again, it helps to reduce the visual mass of this car when you look at it from the rear. Your reflectors are down here, and also your rear fog lights are mounted down here, if I'm not mistaken. So overall, this does seem pretty good. Now, a slightly controversial opinion of mine is that because there's so much metalwork back here, they could have integrated a boot lid pop button here, but instead they put it down here. And as if knowing that might cause confusion, they've actually put a little sticker here, which you can remove, and if I owned this car, I certainly would have. But once you've opened the tailgate, which is powered as standard, you will find a pretty good amount of space. Given the fact that this is ultimately a D-segment size-ish SUV in terms of interior cabin space, you also get D-segment levels of space in the boot. This boot is a nice shape, it's quite deep and it's quite wide. There is no load lip, although obviously having to lift things over and into the car because it's a crossover might be a little bit of a challenge. There is space underneath the boot floor, a huge amount of space at that. Again, easily large enough for you to hide this car's charging cables, and this also comes with a dual level false floor if you want to try and increase the amount of vertical space, although the improvement is really by about that much. Now, of course, you can fold the rear seat 60-40 should you want to maximize practicality in this car, but there is one problem with the boot of this car, which we first saw in the BYD Sealion 7 Premium, and we have confirmed it in this all-wheel drive model, and that is the fact that this car does not come with a parcel shelf. Although there are actually ridges and sort of like lines where the parcel shelf could fit, as well as little places for the feet of the parcel shelf, unfortunately, it doesn't come with one, which means that if I were to buy one of these, or if you were to buy one of these, I would recommend that you certainly buy one of those parcel shelves online, because that would help to try and minimize the amount of intrusion or visibility of your stuff in the boot, which would be of particularly good use if you're traveling with your car. But if that doesn't matter to you, then there isn't one, so okay. Now, inside the Sealion 7 Performance, again, the differences are very minimal. So whereas the Premium uses faux leather, this car uses actual leather, or at least so they claim, because the overall texture and material and feel is broadly the same. On top of that, in terms of interior appointments, everything in here is exactly the same, barring the ability to now child lock the two rear doors individually rather than locking them together. But that is truly it. Now, what that means is this interior remains very high quality and very, very well put together. So for example, there's lots of soft touch material about the place, lots of this dual contrast stitching everywhere, from both the tops of the door cards all the way down, even into the middle part of the door card, although the bottom remains scratchy plastic for durability. The same goes for the center console, where again, you have a lot more soft touch material until you stretch down here, which means that as far as I'm concerned, this does feel like a very posh interior. Now, in terms of technology, you have a 15-plus-inch screen here in the middle, which controls the majority of your functions. That also includes wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, as well as your HVAC controls. However, compared to the Seal, this car now has physical controls for the air conditioning vents, which is much appreciated compared to the electronic nonsense that you used to get in the Seal. However, because this dashboard architecture is different, the instrument cluster is now integrated into this dash panel very neatly behind the steering wheel, which I think looks really good, and again, is part of that new, slightly more upmarket design language. Now, this display is the larger unit that again we've seen from the BYD Seal, which means that again all of the information that you need is available to you at a glance. It's not the most customizable display in the world, but again you can get the information that you want very easily without moving too much. You just have to press the buttons here or use the little toggle switch here, which I appreciate a lot. And of course, if I don't want to look at that, there is also a full color heads-up display in front of me, which not only shows me my ADAS functions, but it also has even an augmented reality style navigational display, which even works with Android Auto, which is excellent. And it's certainly almost as good as an implementation as what we've seen from Mercedes-Benz. These Chinese car makers are catching up fast, and stuff like that, to me, will impress the sort of customers that will arrive in showrooms in order to take this car out for a test drive. Now, being a large SUV, practicality is also of particular note. So up front, we have a 50-watt wireless charger replete with its own cooling pad. We've got a couple of cup holders here with adjustable depth, which means that even if you have a taller drink, you can actually sink that into the cup holders themselves. You've got a decent amount of space underneath the center console, replete with a couple of USB ports as well to a 12-volt socket. You've got a decently sized center console bin here, which is lined in felt, which means that everything that lives in here is not going to rattle about and make a noise. You have decently sized door bins, big enough for a 1.5-liter size bottle. You have smaller pockets up here, and a decently sized glove box bin here, which is also lined in felt, so things don't rattle about. All of this works very well towards showing off this car as a practical, large family SUV, which I think this car most certainly is. Now, before we move to the rear, there are a couple of things I'd like to point out. Firstly, this is a new steering wheel for BYD, a 4-spoke affair with a stitched leather center boss, which I think looks really upmarket. These buttons also feel rather nice, with a nice tactility to them as well. There are also a bevy of buttons down here, including the crystalline gear selector, as well as buttons here in order to control things like your blind spot monitor, your electronic parking brake, as well as some functions for the HVAC, like your automatic button, as well as switching it on and off. Your drive mode selector lives here, where you're able to select between eco, normal, sport and snow mode should you want to be a little bit more careful. And you still have a roller knob here for your volume control, which I like a lot. There's also a start-stop button, which is somewhat redundant because this car does offer an auto-on, auto-off function, where when you unlock the car, it switches on, and when you lock the car, it switches off, which means that this is a button that you won't really have to use all that much. But overall, the front half of this cabin is very, very nice, just like what we saw from the Sealion 7 Premium, and so this remains a big win in my book. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the BYD Sealion 7 is sort of like a D-segment SUV, which means that space back here is excellent. With the front seat set up in my driving position, about 170 centimeters, you can see I have acres of knee room. And despite the standard fit panoramic sunroof replete with electric roller blind, I still have a pretty good amount of headroom as well, although taller adults may struggle with headroom. However, these rear seats are adjustable, which means that you can sit more upright should you like, or you can lean it all the way back if you prefer that instead. On top of that, practicality in this car is pretty good too. You get 3 pockets behind the rear seats, you get decently sized door bins, big enough for a litre sized bottle, you get a couple of crotch coolers with no additional air vents on the B-pillar, which is a slight shame, but you do get USB-A and USB-C ports. You also get a deployable center armrest here with a couple of cup holders, as well as a very shallow bin here, perhaps large enough for cables or some paper. So overall, life back here is pretty good. Now, in terms of the overall comfort, because this car rides on a unique EV platform, it does mean that the floor is completely flat, although as you can see here, I don't have all the under thigh support that I would have liked, because the seat bases, while long, are set up a little bit flat, which means that you do have to stretch out underneath the seat in front of you. However, because that floor is flat and the wheelbase is long, stretching out is not an issue at all. And because the BYD Sealion 7 is quite wide, it also means that you can have a third person sat here relatively comfortably, because there's no foot wars here, although obviously thigh and shoulder space will be of some concern. That said, if you only have 2 rear passengers, these seats are very nicely scalloped, which means that I do have a pretty good amount of lateral support, and the material quality back here is just as good as it is in the front, with lots of soft touch material, lots of that dual stitching that I mentioned earlier, and overall life is pretty good. Now, a couple of things I would like to point out. Firstly, the Sealion 7 Performance, just like the Premium, does come with that very extensive ambient lighting system, which stretches all the way to the rear, which means that at night, this car still looks as good as it does in the day. The other thing that I'd like to point out is the fact that for a lot of people who may be considering one of these cars to be chauffeur-driven, you will appreciate the fact that, again, you have a lot of room on the left-hand side. And the front seat, although it doesn't offer boss switches, even in its current position, you still have a pretty good amount of knee room, which means that you'll never really be fighting for space if you're sat back here with your driver in the front seat. Now, talking about the BYD Sealion 7 in context, this is ultimately a large SUV, which means that this is a car that some families will consider to take over longer distance trips. And that, to me, is where this car shines best, although there is still one prevailing problem. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one of the benefits of the Sealion Performance over the Premium rear-wheel drive is the performance, and of course the updated suspension, because this car uses active frequency dampers, not too dissimilar to what we've seen before from BMW and Mercedes-Benz. Now, from the get-go, the first thing you'll notice obviously is that performance. So for example, when you're trying to join a motorway like I am now, it's very easy for you to get up to speed without too much effort. And of course, because this car is electric, there is no engine noise to let you know that you're gathering speed. And so it makes for a very seamless, very smooth driving experience, which is a huge benefit, particularly when you're driving about in town. Now, On the motorway and in town, refinement in this car is excellent because you have acoustic glass all the way around, wind noise is very well suppressed, and even though this car rides on high-performance 20-inch alloy wheels, because this car uses Michelin Pilot Sport EVs, the amount of road noise into the car is also very, very well suppressed. And so even up to 120, 130 kilometers an hour, the amount of noise that gets into this car is very minimal, which means that the Sealion 7 is a pretty good car to do long motorway runs, or in fact to just do your daily grind, to go to and from work, for example. It's absolutely excellent at that. However, because this is the Sealion Performance and because it also has red brake calipers, unfortunately this car is writing some checks that it cannot cash, because if you were to find yourself on a B road, you'll very quickly find that these active frequency dampers don't really do much to manage this car's weight. Much like the Sealion 7 Premium, the moment you chuck it into a corner, the weight of this car becomes immediately apparent. Not only will it begin to tilt, but you'll also feel this car really push against the side walls of those tires. So this is not a car to be driven intently, and so it does demarcate itself differently from the BYD Seal, which we said was a pretty convincing performance saloon if you want to look at it that way. Instead, the Sealion 7's character lends itself to a much calmer, much more serene driving experience, the sort of thing where you just sort of drive about in the most relaxed fashion possible, whereas the BYD Seal has a slightly more dual personality to it in that regard. However, most people aren't going to be looking at a car like this in order to carve corners anyway, and so as you're driving it about like this, again, it provides a very serene driving experience. And then you add to that this car's adaptive safety features or advanced safety features. Now, because this car comes with a driver monitoring system and eye tracking, this car does offer level 2.5 semi-autonomy, which means that you have things like autonomous emergency braking, adaptive cruise control with traffic jam assist, lane keep assist, blind spot monitoring, safe exit alert, as well as that fantastic 360-degree camera that I showed you earlier. As a result, this car is very well packaged as a daily drivable SUV. Be it something that you want to drive over longer distances or just to drive about in town, the Sealion 7 really can do it all. And when you talk about the advanced driver assist features, the adaptive cruise control in this car is just as good as we've seen from other BYD models before, which means that if you're stuck in traffic, you can really just let the car do the work, and it does so pretty well. Now, in terms of downsides, there are a couple. And it starts first with the overall energy efficiency. Now, we haven't really been able to figure out this car's average efficiency because unfortunately the trip and the sort of data on this car resets itself every 50 kilometers. Now, as we've been driving it about in town, this car's been reporting about 16 to 16.9 kilowatt hours to the 100, which means that this car will comfortably do about 500 kilometers on a charge. However, if you're doing long motorway runs at about 120 kilometers an hour, this car will report somewhere between 17.2 to 18 kilowatt hours to the 100, which means that again, you're looking at a range figure a little bit below 500 kilometers on a charge. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? Not really, because it does mean that with this LFP battery, being able to charge it to full every time, you will always have a convincing amount of range in this car no matter what. So range anxiety isn't really all that much of a concern. If you're driving from KL to Penang, that's no issue. If you're driving from Johor to Penang, then you might encounter some problems, but at least this car DC charges at a pretty good rate. However, because of the existence of the BYD Seal, which is a car that keeps coming back to me as I consider the Sealion 7, that car offers maybe slightly less practicality, but you have pretty much the same level of refinement, the same level of comfort, a little bit better dynamic ability. But more importantly, in the Seal Premium, that car will comfortably do 600 kilometers all day long, which is a significant advantage over the Sealion. This is a bigger, heavier car, and so there are some dividends that must be paid as a result. But overall, understanding the fact that this will never be as efficient as a saloon, the Sealion 7 is a really convincing package. I think it's very well built. I think the space is fantastic. I like this balance between digital and physical controls, and it just means that this is such an easy car to get along with. And even in this performance model, if you just knock it into eco mode, the powertrain response is a lot more approachable than you might necessarily expect, or perhaps what you might expect given this car's performance figures. However, if you want a car that offers slightly more in terms of connected features, then you may be more impressed by the Xpeng G6, because that car offers Tesla rivaling levels of connectivity plus more intelligent features via the app. And of course, you can also get that car in its entry-level version or fitted with an LFP battery, which means again you still enjoy the same 0 to 100 to 0 type charging ability. Although if you want something that is perhaps a little bit more mainstream, there is also the updated Tesla Model Y. That car is slightly more power efficient, and of course you do benefit from having access to the supercharger network, although that isn't quite as wide-reaching as Tesla would like you to believe. And so to me, considering all three vehicles, the Sealion 7 is the large electric SUV that I would have myself. I like the battery, I like the way it's presented, I am alright with the way it drives, although again it's not quite as dynamic as the BYD Seal, but overall I think this is a package that will get along with a lot of people. 90% of buyers will appreciate the way this car is set up because it is set up very, very well. And so that concludes our review of the BYD Sealion 7 Performance. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and TikTok. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel so that you're always up to date with the very latest developments in the automotive industry. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe and jangan bodoh.